The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it haunted the city. A persistent gray mist that blurred the lines between the sky and the Puget Sound. I was standing in my kitchen, the smell of freshly sanded cedar still clinging to my skin from a late night in the workshop when the first heavy rap hit my front door. It wasn't the neighborly tap of someone looking for a cup of sugar, or the frantic thud of a delivery driver in a rush. This was the rhythmic, authoritative strike of someone who carried the weight of the law on their knuckles. I stood there, for a heartbeat, my old Vance construction hoodie damp at the cuffs, watching the shadow of two figures through the frosted glass of the door. When I pulled it open, the cold morning air rushed in, smelling of wet asphalt and brine. Standing on my porch were two deputies, their uniforms crisp despite the drizzle, their faces set in that practiced, neutral expression that tells you your day is about to fall apart. Officer Miller, the older one, with a salt and pepper mustache, held a clipboard like it was a weapon. He didn't ask if I was Arthur Vance. He stated it, and when I nodded, the silence that followed felt heavier than the fog rolling off the coast. My chest tightened. That sharp, electric hum of anxiety vibrating under my ribs, the same feeling you get when a circular saw binds in a piece of oak and you know it's about to kick back. They didn't cuff me, but their presence was a shackle of its own. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mrs. Gable's curtains twitch. In a neighborhood where the most exciting thing usually happened was a stray cat in a dumpster, to police cruisers parked at my curb was a headline. I stood there in my socks, feeling small and exposed, as they started asking about my phone, about my whereabouts the previous night, and specifically about Sonia. Just 24 hours ago, I was a respected contractor with a clean record and a quiet life. Now, as the rain began to soak into the porch steps, I realized my ex-wife hadn't just moved out of my house a year ago. She had been waiting in the tall grass for the perfect moment to strike. To understand the wreckage on my doorstep, I had to look back exactly 12 hours, to a Tuesday night that started with a single, buzzing notification on my mahogany kitchen table. At 7:43 p.m., the house had been quiet, save for the low growl of the refrigerator and a classic blues track playing softly on the radio. I was doing what I always did, reconciling invoices, checking the grain on a new batch of timber, and trying to ignore the emptiness of the second chair. Then the screen lit up. "We need to talk. It's urgent." 8 words from Sonia. For 27 years, that phrase had been her leash, a way to pull me back into her orbit whenever she felt her control slipping. Our divorce had been final for exactly a year, finalized in a cold, sterile room at the King County Courthouse, and yet she still acted like my peace of mind was her property. I stared at the phone, my lawyer Nora's voice echoing in my head about not engaging. But pride is a stubborn ghost. In a moment of petty clarity, I typed back, "Can't talk. On a date with your sister." I hit send before my common sense could catch up. It was a lie of omission. I was seeing Grace. But it wasn't a date in the scandalous way Sonia would imagine. Still, for 5 seconds, the sting of that reply felt like justice. I had no idea that those 5 seconds were the match that would burn my entire reputation to the ground by sunrise. The drive to the outskirts of the city felt different that night. The neon signs of the diners and gas stations blurred in the heavy Seattle rain, reflecting off the hood of my truck in long, bleeding streaks of crimson and gold. My heart was still thumping from that text, that reckless, impulsive jab I'd sent to Sonia. It was the first time in a year I'd actually fought back, and while the adrenaline was fading, a cold sense of dread was beginning to take its place. Sonia didn't handle no very well, and she certainly didn't handle being replaced, especially by someone from her own bloodline. I pulled into the parking lot of the Silver Anchor, a weathered diner tucked between a closed-down marina and a row of industrial warehouses. It was the kind of place where the air always smelled of salt water and over-fried hash browns, a place where people went when they didn't want to be seen. Grace's car was already there, a modest silver sedan that looked as tired as I felt. Seeing it brought a small, genuine smile to my face, the first one in days. Grace was the opposite of Sonia in every way that mattered. Where Sonia was a storm of ambition and curated appearances, Grace was the steady ground beneath the trees. She had stayed quiet during the divorce, keeping her distance until the dust settled. And then she'd reached out with a simple message, "Artie, you're a good man. Don't let her convince you otherwise." When I stepped inside, the bell above the door gave a lonely chime. Penny, the waitress who had worked there since the Bush administration, gave me a tired nod as I slid into the booth across from Grace. She was holding a mug of tea, her brown hair pulled back in a practical clip, her eyes searching mine before I even said a word. "You look like you just walked through a live wire, Artie," she said softly. Her voice had a grounding quality, a rasp that felt like home. "I might have," I replied, exhaling a breath I felt like I'd been holding since Tuesday morning. I leaned back, the cracked vinyl of the booth groaning under my weight. "Sonia texted," the usual urgent nonsense. "I did something stupid, Grace." I told her I was with you. Grace didn't flinch. She didn't gasp or get angry. She just set her mug down slowly, her gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window. She texted, "Me, too," she admitted. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. She asked if I knew where you were. She sounded frantic, but not the kind of frantic someone gets when they're worried about you. It was the kind of frantic she gets when she's losing a bet. We sat in silence for a moment as Penny dropped off 2 plates of meatloaf and a side of bitter coffee. The diner hummed with the low-frequency mumble of late-night truckers and shift workers, a symphony of the weary. As I picked at my food, I told Grace about the business, about how the custom cabinetry shop was finally starting to turn a profit again. After the settlement bled me dry, I told her about the plans I had for the summer. For a brief hour, the ghost of my ex-wife retreated into the corners of the room. We talked about things that didn't involve lawyers or property lines. We talked about the silence of the woods and the way the cedars smelled when it was first cut. But the peace was an illusion. Every time my phone buzzed in my pocket, I felt a jolt of cortisol. I refused to look at it. I wanted this one night to be mine. I wanted to believe that a 56-year-old man could have a second act without the first act burning the theater down. "She's not going to let this go, Artie," Grace warned as we walked out to the parking lot later that night. The rain had turned into a fine, freezing mist. Sonia doesn't see people as people. She sees them as assets or obstacles. Right now, you're an obstacle that's starting to push back. Be careful. I watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the fog, and for the first time in my life, I felt like a hunted man in my own city. I drove home, the heater in the truck blasting against the chill, and tossed my phone onto the kitchen counter without checking the notifications. I was tired of the games, tired of the legal threats, tired of the 27 years of emotional gymnastics. I went to bed, listening to the old house settle, thinking I had won a small victory. I didn't know that while I slept, Sonia was busy weaving a web of lies that would make the morning knock on my door feel like the easy part. I didn't know that she was already reaching out to our daughter, Maya, and our old friends, painting a picture of a man who had finally snapped. By the time the sun began to struggle against the Seattle clouds, the Arthur Vance that the community knew, the honest, hard-working craftsman, was being replaced by a shadow of a villain I didn't recognize. The transition from a private dispute to a public execution happened with terrifying speed. After the deputies left my porch that Wednesday morning, the air in my neighborhood felt different, thicker, colder, and filled with a sudden, sharp judgment. I stood at my kitchen window, watching the rain pool in the ruts of my gravel driveway, clutching a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. I felt like a man standing on a collapsing sandbar in a city like Seattle, and specifically, in the tight-knit community of craftsmen and contractors I moved in. Your name isn't just a label, it's your bond. It's the reason people hand over the keys to their million-dollar homes and trust you to tear down their walls. By 9:30 a.m., the first crack appeared in the foundation of my business. I was sitting in my truck, parked outside a job site in the upscale neighborhood of Bellevue. It was a beautiful mid-century modern home where I was supposed to install custom walnut cabinetry, a $30,000 contract that I had been counting on to bridge the gap in my savings. My phone chimed with an email notification. It was from the homeowner, a woman who had previously praised my integrity and old-school work ethic. Arthur. The email began, The lack of a formal greeting already a red flag. We've decided to move in a different direction. For the kitchen project, please do not come to the house today. We will send a check for the materials already purchased. We feel it's best for both parties if we part ways now. No explanation. No sorry for the inconvenience. Just a cold, digital door slammed in. My face. My grip tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I knew exactly what had happened. Sonia didn't have to call them directly. She just had to plant the seed. She knew all my major clients. She moved in the same social circles as the architects who recommended me. With a shaking hand, I opened my browser and searched for my business name, Vance Custom Woodworking. There it was. At the very top of my business profile, a new 1-star review had been posted an hour ago by an account with no photo. Be careful with this man. The review read, he seemed professional at first, but his personal life is a mess of harassment and unstable behavior. The police were at his house this morning, not someone I want in my home around my family. The words felt like a physical blow to the solar plexus. It was surgical. She didn't accuse me of being a bad carpenter. She accused me of being a bad man. In the modern world, the latter is far more expensive. I could feel the heat rising in my neck, a volatile mixture of shame and righteous fury. My first instinct, the one that had served me for 30 years on construction sites, was to fight back. I wanted to call the client and demand an explanation. I wanted to reply to the review with a scathing defense of my character. I wanted to drive to Sonia's new condo and demand she stop the madness. But then I remembered Frank Miller's voice. Frank had been my mentor when I was just a kid carrying toolboxes. He'd seen every kind of drama a job site could throw at a man. I called him, my voice cracking as I explained the email and the review. Artie, listen to me. Frank said, his voice gravelly and calm. You're an electrician at heart. Even if you're working with wood now, what do you do when there's a short in the wall? You don't just start grabbing wires. You kill the power. You isolate the circuit. She's killing my business, Frank, I hissed, watching a neighbor walk their dog past my truck, glancing at me, and then quickly averting their eyes. I'm losing $500 a minute just sitting here. She's baiting you. Frank countered. She wants you to show up at her door screaming. She wants you to leave a nasty voicemail. She needs proof that you're the monster she's telling everyone you are. Right now, all she has are whispers. Don't give her a roar. He gave me the name of a lawyer, Eleanor Nora Sterling. He told me she was the kind of person who didn't care about feelings. She only cared about the paper trail. As I drove toward Nora's office in downtown Seattle, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a client. It was Maya, my daughter. My heart sank. Maya was 24, finishing her master's degree, and she had already been through enough during the divorce. I hesitated, then answered, Dad. Her voice was small, tight with a kind of anxiety that broke my heart. Mom just posted something on her private Facebook. She's talking about domestic peace and how hard it is to move on when someone won't let go. People are. They're saying horrible things about you in the comments, Dad. They're calling you a stalker. I pulled over into a turnout overlooking the gray expanse of the Sound. The water was choppy, whitecaps dancing on the dark surface. Maya, I haven't touched her. I haven't even seen her. It was just a text, a stupid text about being with Grace. No, Dad, she whispered. But the story is outgrowing the truth. She's telling people she's scared. She's creating a record. Please, just stay away from her. I hung up and sat in the silence of the cab. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. I realized then that Sonia wasn't just trying to win the divorce anymore. She was trying to erase me. She was trying to strip away the only thing I had left, my dignity and my ability to earn a living. I reached Nora Sterling's office a few minutes later. It was located in a sleek, glass-fronted building that smelled of expensive espresso and old law books. Nora didn't look like a shark. She looked like a librarian who had seen too much. She sat me down, listened to the entire story without interrupting, and then held out her hand for my phone. She scrolled through the texts, the review, and the screenshots Maya had sent me. Then she looked up, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. Arthur, she said. her voice cool and professional. "This isn't about a date with her sister. And it's not even about a 1-star review." "Then what is it about?" I asked, my hands trembling. In my lap, she tapped a finger on a document she had pulled up on her computer, a preliminary credit report. She'd run the moment I called her office from the car. "It's about leverage. Your ex-wife didn't just file a police report to embarrass you. She did it to create a character profile because she's about to get hit with something big. And she needs you to be the villain so she can play the victim." She turned the monitor toward me. My eyes blurred as I tried to make sense of the rows of numbers. But one line stood out in bold, a line of credit opened for months ago, using a business LLC that still had my name attached to it. The balance was $60,000, and it was nearly maxed out. "The power isn't just off, Arthur," Nora said quietly. "The whole house is rigged to blow, and she's holding the match." Nora's office felt like a pressurized chamber outside. The Seattle skyline was disappearing behind a curtain of slate-colored clouds, but inside, the air was static with the weight of the documents spread across her desk. I stared at the computer screen, the glowing white light making my eyes ache. $60,000. That wasn't just a number, that was my retirement, my daughter's safety net, and the specialized tools I'd spent decades collecting. "I don't understand," I rasped, my voice sounding like it was coming from a mile away. "We settled everything a year ago. The LLC was supposed to be dissolved or transferred. My name wasn't supposed to be on anything she touched. On paper, yes," Nora said, her pen tapping rhythmically against a legal pad. "But Sonia is a realtor, Arthur. She knows how to navigate the cracks in the system. She found an old limited power of attorney you signed back in 2018, when you were doing that big hospital contract, and she was handling your back-end office work. You never formally revoked it with the bank, and she knew it." I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was back in 2018. I remembered that night. I had come home after a 16-hour shift, my back screaming and my fingers cramped from pulling wire. Sonia had met me at the door with a glass of wine and a stack of papers. "Just sign these." "Honey," she'd said, her voice like silk. "It's just so I can sign for the supply deliveries while you're on site. It'll save you the trip to the office." I had trusted her. I had signed my life away because I was too tired to read the fine print. She used that old authorization to open a business expansion line of credit 3 months ago. Nora continued, her eyes scanning the digital trail. She funneled the money into a shell company, SV Estates. From there, the money vanishes into consulting fees. But the debt belongs to the original LLC. It belongs to you. The betrayal felt like a cold blade between my ribs. It wasn't just that she had stolen money. She had used my own exhaustion against me. She had waited for years, keeping that piece of paper like a hidden ace, waiting for the moment she needed a lifeboat. "This is why the police were at your door, Arthur," Nora said, leaning forward. "She's not just trying to embarrass you. She's building a hostile environment defense. If she can prove you're an unstable, harassing ex-husband, she can argue in court that any financial discrepancies were part of your erratic behavior, or that you authorized the spending during a period of reconciliation that went sour. She's creating a smokescreen of drama to hide the theft. So what do we do?" I asked. My fear was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It was the same feeling I got when I found a dangerous, frayed wire in a crawl space. You don't panic. You fix it. "We stop reacting," Nora said firmly. "She wants you to call her and scream about the money. She wants you to leave a paper trail of anger. Instead, we're going to go silent. We're going to let her think her plan is working, while she's busy posting on Facebook and playing the victim to the neighbors. I'm going to freeze every account associated with your social security number. We're going to file a notice of fraud with the lenders." I left Nora's office and drove home in a daze. I didn't go inside the house. Instead, I went to my workshop, the detached garage, where the smell of sawdust and linseed oil usually acted as a sanctuary. I sat on my workbench, surrounded by the tools of my trade. My phone buzzed. A text from Grace. "Are you okay? Sonia just called our mother. She's crying, saying you're threatening her, Artie. She's losing her mind." I didn't reply. I Followed Nora's orders. I took the phone and placed it in a metal toolbox, snapping the lid shut. Silence. I spent the next 4 hours doing the only thing that made sense. I worked. I took a rough slab of maple and began to plane it. The rhythmic SHHH-SHHH of the steel blade against the wood was the only sound in the garage. With every pass, a thin curl of wood fell to the floor. I wasn't just smoothing a board. I was trying to smooth out my life. But as the sun went down and the shadows in the garage lengthened, the reality of my situation settled in. I was 56 years old. I had built a reputation in this city brick by brick, nail by nail. And now, my ex-wife was using a 5-year-old signature to turn me into a criminal in the eyes of the bank and a predator in the eyes of the community. I looked at the maple board. It was beautiful, clear-grained, and strong. But if you applied enough pressure in the wrong place, even the strongest wood would splinter. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my dark living room, watching the rain hit the glass. At 3 a.m., I saw a car slow down in front of my house. It sat there for a long minute, its headlights cutting through the fog, before slowly crawling away. I didn't know if it was a deputy, a curious neighbor, or Sonia herself, checking to see if I had broken yet. I realized then that this wasn't going to end with a polite conversation or a court date. Months away, this was a war of attrition. Sonia was trying to drain my battery until I had nothing left to fight with. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and pulled out a dusty accordion folder from the back of the junk drawer. It was filled with old tax returns, bank statements, and marriage licenses. I sat at the table and began to sort. If she wanted to use the past as a weapon, I would have to find my own shield in the wreckage. By the time the gray Seattle dawn began to break, I had found it. A small, yellowed receipt tucked into the back of a folder, a record of a bank meeting from 4 years ago that Sonia had forgotten. My heart began to race. It was a live wire, and for the first time in 48 hours, I was the one holding the insulated pliers. Nora's office felt like a pressurized chamber. Outside, the Seattle skyline was disappearing behind a curtain of slate-colored clouds, but inside, the air was static with the weight of the documents spread across her desk. I stared at the computer screen, the glowing white light making my eyes ache. $60,000. That wasn't just a number, that was my retirement, my daughter's safety net, and the specialized tools I'd spent decades collecting. I don't understand, I rasped, my voice sounding like it was coming from a mile away. We settled everything a year ago. The LLC was supposed to be dissolved or transferred. My name wasn't supposed to be on anything she touched. On paper, yes, Nora said, her pen tapping rhythmically against a legal pad. But Sonia is a realtor, Arthur. She knows how to navigate the cracks in the system. She found an old limited power of attorney you signed back in 2018, when you were doing that big hospital contract and she was handling your back-end office work. You never formally revoked it with the bank, and she knew it. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was back in 2018. I remembered that night. I had come home after a 16-hour shift, my back screaming and my fingers cramped from pulling wire. Sonia had met me at the door with a glass of wine and a stack of papers. Just sign these. Honey, she'd said, her voice like silk. It's just so I can sign for the supply deliveries while you're on site. It'll save you the trip to the office. I had trusted her. I had signed my life away because I was too tired to read the fine print. She used that old authorization to open a business expansion line of credit 3 months ago. Nora continued, her eyes scanning the digital trail. She funneled the money into a shell company, SV Estates. From there, the money vanishes into consulting fees. But the debt belongs to the original LLC. It belongs to you. The betrayal felt like a cold blade between my ribs. It wasn't just that she had stolen money. She had used my own exhaustion against me. She had waited for years, keeping that piece of paper like a hidden ace, waiting for the moment she needed a lifeboat. This is why the police were at your door, Arthur. Nora said, leaning forward. She's not just trying to embarrass you. She's building a hostile environment defense. If she can prove you're an unstable, harassing ex-husband, She can argue in court that any financial discrepancies were part of your erratic behavior, or that you authorized the spending during a period of reconciliation that went sour. She's creating a smokescreen of drama to hide the theft. So what do we do? I asked. My fear was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It was the same feeling I got when I found a dangerous, frayed wire in a crawlspace. You don't panic. You fix it. We stop reacting, Nora said firmly. She wants you to call her and scream about the money. She wants you to leave a paper trail of anger. Instead, we're going to go silent. We're going to let her think her plan is working, while she's busy posting on Facebook and playing the victim to the neighbors. I'm going to freeze every account associated with your social security number. We're going to file a notice of fraud with the lenders. I left Nora's office and drove home in a daze. I didn't go inside the house. Instead, I went to my workshop, the detached garage, where the smell of sawdust and linseed oil usually acted as a sanctuary. I sat on my workbench, surrounded by the tools of my trade. My phone buzzed. A text from Grace. Are you okay? Sonia just called our mother. She's crying, saying you're threatening her, Artie. She's losing her mind. I didn't reply. I followed Nora's orders. I took the phone and placed it in a metal toolbox, snapping the lid shut. Silence. I spent the next 4 hours doing the only thing that made sense. I worked. I took a rough slab of maple and began to plane it. The rhythmic SHHH-SHHH of the steel blade against the wood was the only sound in the garage. With every pass, a thin curl of wood fell to the floor. I wasn't just smoothing a board. I was trying to smooth out my life. But as the sun went down and the shadows in the garage lengthened, the reality of my situation settled in. I was 56 years old. I had built a reputation in this city brick by brick, nail by nail. And now, my ex-wife was using a 5-year-old signature to turn me into a criminal in the eyes of the bank and a predator in the eyes of the community. I looked at the maple board. It was beautiful, clear-grained, and strong. But if you applied enough pressure in the wrong place, even the strongest wood would splinter. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my dark living room, watching the rain hit the glass. At 3 a.m., I saw a car slow down in front of my house. It sat there for a long minute, its headlights cutting through the fog, before slowly crawling away. I didn't know if it was a deputy, a curious neighbor, or Sonia herself, checking to see if I had broken yet. I realized then that this wasn't going to end with a polite conversation or a court date. Months away, this was a war of attrition. Sonia was trying to drain my battery until I had nothing left to fight with. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and pulled out a dusty accordion folder from the back of the junk drawer. It was filled with old tax returns, bank statements, and marriage licenses. I sat at the table and began to sort. If she wanted to use the past as a weapon, I would have to find my own shield in the wreckage. By the time the gray Seattle dawn began to break, I had found it. A small, yellowed receipt tucked into the back of a folder, a record of a bank meeting from 4 years ago that Sonia had forgotten. My heart began to race. It was a live wire, and for the first time in 48 hours, I was the one holding the insulated pliers. The yellowed receipt I found wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a ghost. It was a record from a local branch of the bank we'd used for decades, dated 6 months before our divorce. It was a change of contact form where I had explicitly requested to be notified of any new lines of credit on the LLC. Below my signature was a handwritten note from the clerk. Primary account holder requests manual verification for all future credit extensions. Sonia had bypassed this by using an online portal and a forged digital signature. But the existence of this paper meant the bank had failed its own security protocol. It was a shield, but a cold one. It didn't stop the whispers, and it didn't stop the pain in my daughter's voice when she pulled into my driveway that morning. Maya didn't knock. She had a key, a remnant of a time when this house was a home and not a crime scene. She walked into the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed and her shoulders hunched under a heavy wool coat. She looked like her mother, but she had my hands calloused and steady right now, though. Those hands were trembling as she set her phone on the table. "Dad, you have to stop," she whispered. Her voice was brittle, like dry pine ready to snap. Stop what? Maya, I haven't done anything, I said, my voice sounding hollow in the quiet kitchen. Mom is a mess, Maya cried, the tears finally spilling over. She's staying at Aunt Grace's now because she says she doesn't feel safe in her own condo. She says you've been driving past her place at night. She says you sent her a message through a third party telling her that the lights are going out for her. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Seattle rain. I haven't left this house except to see Nora Sterling, Maya, and Grace. Grace knows the truth. I was with her that night. Grace is being quiet, Dad. She's caught in the middle, and Mom is leaning on her so hard she might break. Maya stepped closer, her expression shifting from sadness to a desperate kind of anger. The neighborhood is talking. People I grew up with are texting me, asking if you're okay. If you've started drinking again, are you? Is that what this is? I haven't had a drink in 20 years, and you know it, I snapped, the unfairness of it finally piercing my armor. Maya, look at me. Your mother has stolen $60,000 in my name. She is facing a financial collapse because her real estate flippings went south when the interest rates spiked. She needs a villain so she can claim duress when the lenders come knocking. She's using you as a shield. Maya recoiled as if I'd slapped her. The silence that followed was agonizing. This was the masterstroke of Sonia's plan. She knew that even if I won the legal battle, I could lose my daughter in the process. If I fought too hard, I looked like the aggressor. If I didn't fight at all, I was ruined. I don't know who to believe. Maya sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Everything is just noise. Then look at the signal, not the noise, I said. More gently this time. I pushed the yellowed receipt and the credit report Nora had given me across the table. I'm a carpenter, Maya. I build things to last. Why would I destroy the foundation of the only thing I have left, my name? Why would I jeopardize your inheritance? She didn't look at the papers, not yet. She just stood there, caught in the crossfire of a 27-year marriage that was still burning long after the papers were signed, after she left more confused. Then when she arrived, I felt a level of exhaustion that went deeper than bone. I wanted to give up. I wanted to call Sonia and tell her she could have the money, have the house, have the reputation, as long as she left Maya out of it. But then I remembered the way the deputies had looked at me on my porch. I remembered the one-star review that called me a predator. If I walked away now, I wasn't just losing money, I was confirming their lies. I was teaching Maya that the person with the loudest story wins, regardless of the truth. I picked up the phone and called Nora. Nora, she's using Maya. She's telling her I'm stalking her. I said, my voice thick. I expected that, Nora replied, her voice as cool as a mountain stream. It's called Darvo, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. It's a classic tactic. But Arthur, I have some news. Remember that Chamber of Commerce luncheon next Tuesday? The one where Sonia is receiving an award for ethics in real estate. I let out a short, bitter laugh. The irony is almost too much to bear. It's not irony, Nora said. It's an opportunity. We aren't going to sue her in a dark room. We're going to serve her in front of every broker, every lender, and every friend she's used to spread these rumors. We're going to present the manual verification form and the forged digital signatures as part of a formal injunction. You want to do it in public? I want to do it where the light is brightest, Nora said. She's lived in the shadows of whispers for too long. It's time to flip the breaker, Arthur. Are you ready to see what happens when the lights come on? I looked out at my workshop. The rain had stopped, and a single ray of weak, watery sunlight was catching the edge of the maple board I had planed. It was perfectly smooth. Flip the switch, Nora, I said. I'm tired of sitting in the dark. The days leading up to the Chamber of Commerce luncheon felt like walking through a house wired with old, unstable TNT. Every phone call, every rustle of the wind against the siding of my workshop made my skin crawl. I followed Nora's instructions. To the letter, absolute silence. I didn't post on social media. I didn't call Sonia to plead my case. And I didn't try to explain myself to the neighbors who now looked away when I pulled my truck into the driveway. But the isolation was eating at me. It's one thing to be alone. It's another to be cast out. On Sunday night, 2 days before the Ethics in Real Estate event, there was a soft knock on my back door. Not the heavy, rhythmic strike of the deputies, but a hesitant, rhythmic tapping. I opened it to find Grace standing there. She looked haggard. The skin under her eyes was dark, as she was clutching a thick manila envelope against her chest like a life jacket. "I can't stay," she whispered, stepping into the kitchen as I ushered her in. "Sonia thinks I'm at the grocery store. Artie, she's unraveling. The scared victim act. She's performing it so hard I think she's starting to believe it herself. But I found these." She dropped the envelope on the kitchen table. Inside were printouts of internal emails from Sonia's Real Estate, LLC. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scanned them. They weren't just about the money. They were about the intent. In one email to a silent partner, Sonia had written, "Vance is a dinosaur. He doesn't check his digital footprints. By the time he realizes the line of credit is active, he'll be buried in the harassment claims to fight the debt. I just need 6 months to flip the shoreline property. Why are you giving me this?" "Grace," I asked, looking up at her. "She's your sister. This will ruin her." Grace looked at me, her eyes filling with a weary kind of steel. "Because you were my brother for 27 years, Artie. And because the woman in those emails isn't my sister anymore. She's a predator. She's using Maya. And that's where I draw the line. She told Maya today that you used to be physical with her. We both know that's a lie. You've never raised a hand to anyone in your life." The room seemed to tilt. The lie was escalating. It wasn't just financial fraud anymore. She was moving into the territory of character assassination. That could land me in prison. "Grace, you have to be careful," I said, reaching out to touch her arm. "If she knows you're helping me, she won't," Grace said, pulling her coat tighter. "She's too arrogant to think I'd ever betray family. But Artie, you have to finish this. Not just for the money, for your soul. If you let her win this, you'll never be able to look at a piece of wood again without seeing her face." After Grace left, I called Nora. I didn't care that it was 10 p.m. on a Sunday. I read her the emails. "This is the smoking gun, Arthur," Nora said, her voice humming with a predatory satisfaction. "This proves premeditation. It turns a civil dispute into a criminal fraud case. We aren't just going to serve her at the luncheon. Now, we're going to dismantle her." Monday was a blur of preparation. I spent the day in my workshop, but I wasn't woodworking. I was cleaning my tools, sharpening my chisels, and organizing my bench. It's what I do when I need to think. I thought about the life I'd built. I thought about the thousands of hours I'd spent in crawl spaces and attics, making sure families were safe from fires they'd never see coming. I had spent my life protecting people from invisible dangers. I realized then that I had to do the same for myself. That evening, Maya called. She didn't sound angry anymore. She sounded exhausted. "Dad, Mom is talking about a restraining order," she said quietly. "She says she's filing it Wednesday morning." "She can't file it if the truth comes out Tuesday, Maya," I said. "What does that mean?" "It means I need you to trust me one last time. I need you to come to the chamber luncheon. Don't sit with me. Don't sit with her. Just sit in the back and watch. Please, if you ever believed in the man who taught you how to build your first birdhouse, just show up." A long silence stretched over the line. "Okay, Dad, I'll be there. But if this is just more fighting, I'm done. I can't be the rope in this tug-of-war anymore." I hung up and looked at my hands. They were steady. For the first time since the deputies knocked on my door, the tightness in my chest was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, surgical focus. The Seattle rain had returned, a soft patter against the garage roof. I looked at the maple board one last time. It was finished, smooth, strong, and true to its grain. Tomorrow, the world would see the difference between a man who builds and a woman who burns. I went to my closet and pulled out the only suit I owned, the one I'd worn to Maya's graduation. It was a bit tight in the shoulders, but it was honest. I polished my boots. I checked my watch. 12 hours until the lights came on. I lay in bed that night, not sleeping, but watching the shadows of the rain move across the ceiling. I wasn't thinking about revenge. Revenge is a fire that burns the person holding it. I was thinking about grounding in electricity. The ground is the most important part of the circuit. It's where the excess energy goes so it doesn't kill you. Tuesday morning was going to be my ground. The grand ballroom of the Hyatt Regency was a sea of beige carpets, crystal chandeliers, and the muffled clinking of silverware against expensive china. The air smelled of roasted chicken, and lemon-scented floor waxed the sterile scent of professional civility. This was Sonia's arena. She thrived in rooms like this, where appearances were everything and a sharp suit could hide a hollow heart. I sat at a small table near the back, tucked away in the shadows of a large ornamental fern. I felt like a foreign object in the room. My suit was clean, but my hands stained with walnut oil and scarred from 30 years of labor didn't belong on these white linen cloths. Nora sat beside me, her leather briefcase resting on her lap like a coiled spring. She hadn't said a word since we entered. She didn't need to. Across the room, I saw Sonia. She was the center of a small orbit of local power players' real estate. Moguls, bank managers, and city council members. She looked radiant in a sharp, cream-colored dress, her laughter ringing out clear and practiced. She was playing the role of the resilient woman to perfection. Every few minutes, someone would touch her arm sympathetically, and she would give a brave, tired little smile. I knew what they were saying. They were talking about her troubled ex-husband and how remarkably she was holding it all together. Then I saw Maya. She slipped into the back of the room, her face pale, eyes searching the crowd. She looked small in that large space. She found a seat near the exit, her gaze landing on me for a brief, agonizing second before she looked down at her hands. The chamber president, a man named Henderson, who had once hired me to deck his summer home, stepped up to the podium. He cleared his throat, the microphone letting out a sharp, piercing squeal that made everyone wince. "Welcome, everyone," Henderson began. "Today is about celebrating the pillars of our community. People who operate with transparency, trust, and, most importantly, ethics." He paused, smiling towards Sonia's table. "It gives me great pleasure to introduce this year's Excellence in Ethics Award recipient, Sonia Vance." The room erupted in applause. Sonia stood up, dabbing at her eyes, with a napkin a masterstroke of theater, and began her walk toward the stage. She took the podium, looking out over the crowd with a humble expression. "Thank you," she started, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "This past year has been a challenge, personally and professionally, but I've always believed that if you stand in the truth will protect you." I felt Nora's hand on my arm. "Now," she whispered. Nora didn't stand up and scream. She didn't cause a scene. She stood up with a quiet, terrifying grace and walked down the center aisle. The room didn't notice her at first, but as she approached the stage, the whispers started to die down. Sonia's voice faltered. She saw Nora. Then her eyes darted to the back of the room and found me. "Excuse me, Mr. Henderson," Nora said, her voice amplified by the silence. She didn't wait for permission. She placed a thick folder directly onto the podium, right next to Sonia's award. "I am Eleanor Sterling, counsel for Arthur Vance. I have been instructed to formally serve Ms. Vance with a permanent injunction and a notice of criminal fraud investigation." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a transformer blows. "This is not the time or the place," Henderson began, his face reddening. "Actually, it is the perfect place," Nora countered, her voice cutting through the room like a chilled blade. "Because this room is full of the very lenders and brokers whose names were used to facilitate $60,000 in fraudulent credit. These documents include a manual verification request from 2021 and the subsequent digital forgeries used to bypass it. They also include internal communications regarding the premeditated character assassination of my client to cover these financial tracks." Sonia's face didn't just turn pale, it turned a sickly, translucent gray. "This is harassment," she hissed, though the microphone caught it. "He's obsessed. He's trying to destroy me." "No," I said, standing up from my table. My voice wasn't loud, but in that silent room, it carried. I walked toward the stage, my boots heavy on the carpet. "I'm not trying to destroy you, Sonia. I'm just grounding the circuit." Grace stood up then, 3 tables away. She didn't say anything, but she looked directly at Sonia. then at the brokers at the front table, and nodded once, a silent confirmation of everything Nora had just said. The murmurs started then, but they weren't sympathetic anymore. They were the sounds of people who realized they were standing too close to a sinking ship. One of the bank managers leaned forward, squinting at the documents Nora had laid out. He recognized the signatures. He recognized the LLC name, Sonia. Looked at Maya. It was her last move, the mother in distress. But Maya wasn't looking at the stage anymore. She was looking at the folder on the podium. Then at me. She saw the truth in the way Sonia was clutching the wood of the podium. Until her knuckles were white, she saw the panic of a thief caught in the high dash beams. Maya stood up, her face set in a mask of grief, and walked out the back door without looking back. Sonia opened her mouth to speak, to spin one last web. But Henderson, ever the businessman, saw the writing on the wall. He gently moved the microphone away from her. "I think," Henderson said, his voice cold, "we need to take a recess." The lights in the ballroom seemed to grow brighter, harsher. People began to stand, moving away from Sonia as if she were contagious. I stood at the base of the stage, looking up at the woman I had been married to for nearly 3 decades. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt the heavy, quiet relief of a job finally finished. Sonia looked down at me, the mask finally gone, replaced by a raw, naked hatred. "You think you won," she whispered. "I don't think I won anything, Sonia," I said quietly. "I just got my name back. You can keep the rest." I turned and walked out, Nora following close behind. As the heavy doors of the ballroom swung shut, the sound of the chaos inside faded, replaced by the cool, damp air of the Seattle afternoon. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time in a year, I wasn't the one standing in the rain. The aftermath of the luncheon wasn't like a movie. There were no cheering crowds or sudden bursts of music. Instead, it was a slow, quiet unraveling of the lies that had tangled my life. As I walked out into the Seattle afternoon, the air felt incredibly sharp, like a fresh chisel edge. The rain had paused, leaving the city dripping and shimmering under a pale, bruised sky. For the next few weeks, my house became a command center, but it was different this time. Instead of the frantic energy of a man under siege, it was the methodical pace of a craftsman at work. Nora handled the heavy lifting, the legal filings, the communications with the bank, and the coordination with the district attorney's office. The emails Grace had provided were the final nails in the coffin. Sonia's ethics award was quietly rescinded. Her real estate license was suspended pending a full investigation, and the $60,000 debt was officially moved into a disputed fraud category, lifting the weight from my shoulders. But the real work was happening in my kitchen. About 10 days after the event, Maya came over. She didn't bring any accusations or tears this time. She brought a box of old photos and a bottle of wine. We sat at the mahogany table, the same one where I'd received that first urgent text. And for a long time, we just sat in the silence. It was a comfortable silence, the kind you share with someone when you've both survived the same storm. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said finally, her voice low. "I should have known. I didn't want to believe she was capable of that. It's hard to realize your mother is a stranger." "She isn't a stranger, Maya," I said, reaching across to cover her hand with mine. "She's just a person who lost her way. She started valuing the image of the house more than the foundation. You don't have to apologize for wanting to believe the best of her. That's the part of you that's like me." We talked for hours, not about the fraud or the court cases, but about the future. She was finishing her degree, and I was starting to get calls again. Henderson had called me personally to apologize, offering me a massive restoration project on an old Victorian in Queen Anne. The one-star reviews were being drowned out by new ones from people who had seen the truth come out. Grace and I kept things slow. There were no grand declarations, just quiet dinners and long walks along the Sound. We were to people who had spent our lives protecting a woman who didn't want to be saved, and now we were learning how to protect each other. One evening, Grace joined me in the workshop. I was working on a small cedar chest for Maya graduation gift. The smell of the wood was intoxicating, sweet and earthy. Grace watched me for a while, her hands tucked into her pockets. "You look different, Artie," She said, "How so? You don't look like you're waiting for a wire to spark anymore." I stopped the plane and looked at the wood. It was true, the constant, buzzing vibration in my chest, the one I'd carried for 27 years, had finally stopped. I was 56 years old, divorced, and I'd almost lost everything. But as I looked at the smooth, clean grain of the cedar, I realized I hadn't lost my name. I had just refined it. Sonia eventually moved away, fleeing the gossip and the legal pressure for a fresh start in another state. I didn't wish her ill, but I didn't wish her back. She was a lesson I had finally finished learning. Here's what I know now, and I'll say it plain. Reputation isn't something people give you. It's something you build every single day with the way you treat people and the way you handle your tools. Silence isn't always strength sometimes. You have to be the one to flip the breaker so the whole house doesn't burn down. I'm still a carpenter. I still wake up with sawdust in my hair and the smell of cedar on my skin. But now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a victim or a villain. I see a man who stood his ground when the earth started to shake. I see Arthur Vance, and for the first time in my life, that's more than enough. The winter in Seattle eventually gave way to a crisp, bright spring. The kind of spring that makes you forget how long the gray months actually lasted. My workshop was busier than ever. The Queen Anne project had turned into a referral engine. And for the first time in my career, I was turning down work, not out of spite, but because I finally understood the value of my own time. I was finishing the last coat of oil on Maya's cedar chest when Frank Miller swung by. He didn't come to talk shop. He came with 2 fly rods and a thermos of coffee. He sat on a stool, watching me buff the wood until it glowed like honey. "You heard?" Frank asked, pouring a cup of coffee. "Heard what?" "Sonia. I saw a post from a broker down in California. She's working in a high-end boutique firm in Santa Barbara. Changed her name back to her maiden name. Looks like she's already back in the game." I paused, the cloth in my hand resting on the smooth lid of the chest. A year ago, that news would have sent a jolt of anger through me. I would have wondered why she got to have a fresh start after what she tried to do to mine. But as I stood there in the quiet of my own creation, I felt nothing, just a mild curiosity. Like hearing about a distant weather pattern that wasn't headed my way. "Good for her," I said, and I meant it. "I hope she finds what she's looking for without having to steal it this time." Frank grunted, a small smile playing under his mustache. "You're a better man than me, Artie Vance." I'd still be looking for a way to short-circuit her career. Life is too short to spend it as a lightning rod, Frank. I'd rather be the ground. That afternoon, I delivered the chest to Maya. She had just finished her master's and was moving into her first apartment, a small, sun-drenched space overlooking the park. We hauled the heavy cedar piece up 3 flights of stairs. When we set it down in the center of her living room, the smell of the forest filled the apartment. "It's perfect, Dad," she said, running her hand over the dovetail joints I'd spent hours perfecting. She looked at me, and for the first time, the shadow of the divorce was completely gone from her eyes. "It's solid. It feels like it's going to last forever." "That's the idea," I told her as I drove home. I realized that the 9,000 words of my story, the ones written in legal briefs, the ones whispered in diners, and the ones shouted in ballrooms, didn't define me. The story was just the seasoning. The wood was the life I was living right now. I pulled into my driveway and saw Grace's car parked there. She was sitting on the porch swing, a book in her lap, waiting for the sun to go down. I walked up the steps, the wood beneath my boots, firm and familiar. I didn't look at the neighbor's house to see if the curtains were twitching. I didn't check my phone for urgent texts. I just sat down beside her. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about what kind of garden we wanted to plant in the backyard, something with deep roots and flowers that could handle a little bit of rain. I've learned that life is a lot like a piece of raw timber. It's full of knots, imperfections, and hidden cracks. You can try to paint over them, or you can do the hard work of sanding them down until the true character of the grain shows through. It takes time, it takes patience, and sometimes it takes a lot of dust. But in the end, when the light hits it just right, you realize that the scars and the knots are exactly what make the piece beautiful. I am Arthur Vance. I am a father, a friend, and a builder, My name is clear, my lights are on. And for the first time in a very long time, the house is finally at peace. If you like history, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story. In the comments, to listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.